Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And for those of you who listen closely to the programme, we begin this morning's broadcast with a small slice of humble pie. I may have given the impression on Friday that the royal wedding at Windsor on Saturday was poised to be one of the dampest of squibs, possibly the dampest squib of all time. I may have dedicated a significant part of Friday's programme to examining just why the prospect was so unappealing and boring. And it's possible I could have been more wrong, but at this point in proceedings, I'm not quite clear how. And I thought it was absolutely magical, magnificent on every imaginable level. So I am very sorry to you for... I've already taken a bit of a kicking on Twitter from people who actually rang in to tell me off on Friday, so I shall apologise toot sweet for, for sort of trying to rain on what turned out to be a rather special parade. And congratulations to Nick and Sheila and everybody else involved in our superb coverage as well. Right, back to normal. Let's get cross about something. The railways are in something of a mess this morning, as you know. The introduction of a new timetable has caused, I would say, relatively predictable chaos. That's not, in and of itself, grounds for chucking everything on the bonfire and starting all over again, is it? But I was listening to the breakfast show earlier, and I heard Matthew Thompson out at one of the mainline stations, vox-popping passengers, commuters, who, one in particular pointed out not only that I think he was a primary school teacher, if memory serves, not only that he pays through the nose for the privilege of being treated like cattle every morning and every evening, but also that the service is increasingly unreliable. People coming into London Bridge on Southern Rail will know that in recent years it's been probably sort of slightly less reliable than the lottery. And equally that nationalisation might be the answer. Now, nationalisation is a fascinating word, because for some of you, as you listen now, it might already be a dirty word, and I don't know why. I think I do know why, but I don't know why you've fallen for the idea that it has to be a dirty word. One of the most interesting crossovers in opinion polling in recent years was the UKIP voters who also were in favour, because you think of UKIP as being quite a right-wing outfit. Rest in peace, I suppose we should say. UKIP RIP. But the membership, the supporters, were very, very positive about rail nationalisation. I don't know if we'll put anything else on the list this morning, but it is perceived as a very left-wing thing. I've been reading Orwell a bit lately, George Orwell, who is... it's quite depressing reading George Orwell if you think that you have occasionally come up with some quite good ideas or some novel insights, because George Orwell got there first. He's like the Clive Bull of political commentary. Every time you think you've come up with a wizard wheeze to do on the radio, it turns out Clive Bull did it in 1983. Same with George Orwell. You think you've made some interesting observations about the state of British society. It turns out George Orwell did it in 1937. Let's read you a little quote from his short work, The English Revolution. He says, "I suggest that the following 6-point programme is the kind of thing we need. The first 3 points deal with England's internal policy, the other 3 with the empire and the world." And I'll read you all 6, actually, even though we're only going to concern ourselves with the first one, because it just plays into that notion I mentioned a moment ago of there being nothing new under the sun. So, number 1, nationalisation of land, mines, railways, banks and major industries. He wrote this during the Second World War, and his contention in this book was that you couldn't win a war without socialism. You had to have patriotism, which he historically argued was maligned wrongly by the left, but you had to have a form of benign, positive patriotism, not hating foreigners, but you go to war to fight with pride and to protect your own country. But he also said we can't win this war without a form of socialism, i.e. everybody, every working man and woman contributing to the war effort had to feel that they had a stake in the country. And that is why, shortly after the end of the Second World War, the 2 greatest socialist projects, arguably in the history of the world, emerged in this country, the National Health Service and the welfare state. I digress slightly. We're talking about railways. Number 2, limitation of incomes. How many times have we said this on the programme? On such a scale that the highest tax-free income in Britain does not exceed the lowest by more than 10 to 1. You're not going to get that passed now. It was plausible in the 1930s, but now I think to get it passed most bosses, most boards, you'd probably have to bring in a multiple of about 50 to 1, which would still be progress, wouldn't it? I mean, how many people work in a company where the boss earns more than 50 times what the lowest person earns? But he went for 10 to 1, bless his cotton socks. Reform of the educational system along democratic lines. We're still talking about that, although, again, I'd say we're more entrenched now than we were when Orwell suggested it. And then some slightly more, perhaps, anachronistic observations about the world stage. Immediate dominion status for India, with power to secede when the war is over. Formation of an Imperial General Council in which the coloured peoples are to be represented. Language very much of its time, obviously. And a declaration of formal alliance with China, Abyssinia and all other victims of the fascist powers. This was his sort of roadmap for rebuilding the world after the destruction of the Second World War. And I just thought I'd share that with you because it really pinged with me over the course of the weekend. I found myself reading back over it and thinking how much of it chimes with so much of the stuff we've talked about together over the years. But we're going to look at railways, OK? That is up and running. I don't know who to talk to. I don't know who to ask. I could book one railway expert and another railway expert to tell me something different. I therefore think we'll just try and do this from first principles. The question I'm asking really will be, are you in favour of nationalising the railways? 0345 6060 973. I know when we've discussed it in the past, and we haven't done it often, it turns out that the subsidies that many of us somewhat lazily believed that British Rail hoovered up, like a Sloane Ranger doing cocaine, it turns out that actually more subsidy has gone post-privatisation into the rail industry than did before. So, and again, this is not by any stretch of the imagination a field of expertise for me, but I think it's fair to say that British Rail was run down somewhat deliberately as a precursor to privatisation. So the public investment effectively stopped. Things got worse. We all presumed it was rotten. We were then persuaded it was rotten because it was nationalised, and the scene was set for privatisation. It's kind of Chomsky 101. Meghan Markle, big Chomsky fan, apparently, as if you didn't like her enough already. So looking at Britain in the 21st century, looking at what's just happened on the East Coast, and wondering whether we have been, since Orwell wrote those words, we've been somewhat brainwashed into thinking that nationalisation is and always will be bad, a negative, a not good thing. I want you to tell me what you think would happen if we nationalised the railways. It's a big platform for Jeremy Corbyn, whose polling has been pretty poor over the weekend, but obviously that's not his fault. Nothing's ever his fault. I want you to tell me what you think of this policy, but also drawing, hopefully, on your experience on the railways. We always put coppers to the front of the queue when we're talking about policing issues, so it seems fair that we would put railway workers past and present to the front of the queue on this one. Why not? Why not? So we've got two strands of questioning. Why do you think nationalisation has become such a dirty word? Perhaps it deserves to be. We want to... God, I'm being very open-minded and balanced today. I don't know what's come over me. Must be wedding fever. So possibly it should be a dirty word. Possibly I'm being very naive and undergraduate and sitting here thinking, well, if it's owned by the government, then all of the money that's raised goes back to the government, goes back into railways, and surely that's preferable from dividends and payouts going to shareholders, many of whom... And this is the weirdest thing about Britain, and one of the things that I think if I was in charge of all the media, this would be in the top 10 stories of national importance, because lots of foreign governments make money out of our railways. Lots of foreign governments have big exposures, big shareholdings in the companies that now run the franchises up and down the United Kingdom. And that, if you can make sense of that for me, I'll give you the money myself. That will be, so that you know, my first line of inquiry if you call me up to tell me that nationalisation is bad, i.e. state-owned infrastructure is a bad thing. I will need you to explain to me why it works if the French government or the Chinese government own British infrastructure, but why it'd be a really bad idea for the British government to own transport infrastructure. Is that enough to chew on? Shall I tell you what's coming up later in the programme? I think we're going to go back to the shops. I said on last week that I didn't want to start predicting what shops would suffer next, and I resisted the urge. But had I not resisted the urge, I would have said I imagine there'll be some bad news from Marks and Spencer's in the coming months, and we wake up this morning to discover that dozens of stores are set to close. I've got another one on the list as well. I'm reluctant to mention it, but... oh, man, I wonder if you can work out what shop I'm talking about. If I tell you I went in on Friday, it's a big shop, sort of warehouse-sized. There's only 2 members of staff working. The manager was as cool as a cucumber, but he was dealing with astonishing levels of customer aggression and unhappiness. And I was kept waiting for 30 minutes. All I wanted to do was give them money. I wanted to give them £100, £150. In return for something, and I had to wait for 30 minutes to do that. So I've got a horrible feeling that that shop probably isn't long for this world either. So we'll look at the future of the high street. As you know, it's one of my all-time favourite subjects. And then I think we're going to look at the growing number of vulnerable homeless people who are being fined, given criminal convictions, and even going to prison as a punishment for begging and rough sleeping. As I say those words, I think of one of the other great English writers of all time. We shift almost effortlessly from George Orwell's social commentary to that of Charles Dickens, who confined his commentary to fiction, but it was no less coruscating and accurate than Orwell's, and that does sound like something you'd expect to have happened in the 19th century. What are you in prison for? Begging. Good Lord. 2018. And I will, I think at this point, resist the urge to suggest that it does put the delightful images of Saturday into a slightly different light when you reflect upon the fact that that also happened in a country where people can be sent to prison for begging. Phone lines are open. 0345 6060 973. Straight up, no complications. What do you think about the notion of nationalising the railways? Is it enough to make you vote Labour? And number 2, why has Britain in the second decade of the 21st century got such a negative view of state ownership, despite the fact that a significant swathe of our national infrastructure is owned by the state, just not this state? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. Why do we have sort of a national quiver at the very mention of the word nationalisation? Maybe you need to be a bit older than me to answer that question. It's always been bad while I've been alive. 0345 6060 973. And with specific reference to the railways, and also with specific reference to the fact that foreign governments own significant swathes of our services. How do we know it wouldn't be a bad thing? How do we know? Let's start with Matthew, who's in High Wycombe. Matthew, what would you like to say?
James, thanks very much for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
What I would like to say is, when I arrived in the UK, I was very positive about private railways, because I had experience of an awful public railway in South Africa. And when I say awful, it's just badly run.
Okay.
There are other badly run public railways, I'm sure, in India and so on. And then after travelling, I won't give the name, but it's the one from South London, from an airport. My experience was coloured slightly different.
But you can say what you want on this programme. Are you talking about the Gatwick Express?
Yeah, no, Govia Thameslink. Just
okay. No, Govia Thameslink. You can do that. There's no problem. As long as you're not now going to say something hugely libellous. Just a bit of context.
They were late.
It's fair enough.
Libellous, just fact. What I wanted to say was, it's all about really nationalisation versus privatisation. Is it good or bad? So, for example, in South Africa, the public airway or airline is very badly run, and it loses a lot of money. But when you look at Ethiopian Airlines, it's state-owned, but it's very, very well run, and it's making money compared to some private operators. So it's all about the people who run it. Does it work? And if private was always better, you and I wouldn't even be having this conversation. We'd look at the metric and we'd say, well, a private railway works better. And the East Coast Main Line wouldn't fail if private was always the way to go. You remind us of, as usually my job, to caution against looking at things in a binary fashion, like 100% on one side or 100% on the other. And you're absolutely right. I don't know, though, how you can predict in advance whether it's going to be a good privatisation or a bad privatisation. Of course, but I mean, well, you can't. But surely you can look at where privatisation has gone wrong, and then amend the rules so you don't repeat the same mistakes, and keep on giving, say, Virgin the contract again. And one more point I'd like to say. And this is for the right-wingers, is they always bleat on and on about, well, competition is why capitalism is great. And I agree, to be honest. So the best product wins out. In which case, I believe there should be a competition between capitalism or private ownership and public ownership. If a public railway is bad in Scotland, then maybe after 3 years' time, some private operator gets a chance, and by sort of a converse, if the East Coast Main Line keeps on failing, they just run it public for a while. If they don't meet standards and strict rules, then sorry, boys, you've had your chance, unions.
Well, they did. I mean, that is what's happened with the East Coast. The last franchise owners failed to meet the terms of their contract, so the government took over. Things went really well. And then they flogged it off again to Virgin Stagecoach, and again they failed to meet the £3.3 billion they were supposed to pay. So it gets taken back under government control. There is, because what you describe is almost ideology free. Apart from the notion of competition being good, and you're right, that's intrinsic to most capitalist theory. But you're not. I don't think you're acknowledging that we have a government at the moment that is completely wedded to privatisation, and if Jeremy Corbyn ever gets into power, arguably you will have the binary opposite of that, whereas you're suggesting a sort of bit of compromise and openness. I worry that with something like the railways, you'd be doing too much fiddling and chopping and changing. You've got to give people a really good run at it to find out whether or not it's going to be an improvement, don't you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a tough one, and obviously you can't just switch it around the same way you can say, oh well, parcel delivery company A is not doing their job, let's go with B. But I think, I mean, if what's being tried now, if over time you could say it's private, public, oh works, private, fail. So maybe it's time to try a bit of public until we have some bad public dominoes.
Private, public, private, public.
Well, yeah,
or something. I'm with you. No, I like it. I mean, I don't know that this is going to be sustained for the entire week, but I do quite like sometimes having very sensible conversations which don't involve having to pick a side. And Matthew really embodies that notion of not picking a side, but recognising that there's probably good under both models. I'm getting a lot of support for my suggestion, and it wasn't plucked out of the sky, but neither did I have the evidence, conclusive evidence in front of me, that there was a deliberate running down of British Rail. I mean, it was a national joke, whether it deserved to be or not. I mean, largely it was the sandwiches that were the national joke. I think they were a stock in trade of the late Terry Wogan, weren't they, British Rail sandwiches? But there was certainly a perception by the time the privatisation came around that British Rail had utterly failed. And whether that was deliberate or not, I guess is up to the historians. But in terms of the money, it certainly looks as though investment and subsidy was much lower pre-privatisation. Joe makes an interesting point. I'm very worried, listening to you talk about railways, that what you've just described as happening to the railways is now happening to the NHS. Gonzalo is in Holborn. What a lovely name. Gonzalo, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you?
Very good, mate. What's on your mind?
Well, I don't agree with the privatization because I think the government doesn't have the money to sustain it.
But it makes a profit.
Because like all of the train operating companies stocks, they pay every year a fee to the government to be able to manage that company. So basically what happened with Virgin in East Midlands, it was that they did the projection of revenue that it didn't happen. So basically the fee that they were paying to the government, it was less of what they were making.
Yes.
So basically they give it back to the government saying that for us it's not viable. So the line is still like profitable, but it was not profitable for Virgin. And also regarding, like, for example, improvements of the railway.
I mean, what happens now is it goes back under the so-called operator of last resort, which is a group led by Arup, the engineering firm, but it is under government control. So what happened last time, as I understand it, is that when it was under government control, things actually improved. So why not just leave it under government control?
Because, okay, it's like one of those things that, imagine that you have like several houses and you are renting the houses and you're not doing nothing and you are earning money. That's the same principle. The government owns the rails.
Yeah, rail track.
They are renting, yes, and they are renting the rail tracks to other companies, and they don't have to do anything.
Yeah, but the company pays for the franchise, and then it makes a profit, which goes to shareholders. And I know this is naive, but the alternative is that all the money goes to the Treasury.
I'm not sure how all of the money goes, but
no, it does. I mean, you're divvying it up. In a sentence, Gonzalo, what is your objection to governments owning railway operators, given that French, German, I think even Chinese governments have significant stakes in British rail operators?
They will not have the money to.
But I've just listed governments that have stakes in British rail operators.
Yes, but okay. So when you want to add like more trains to your train operating company, you need to make like some trains, and it will take like about 10 or 15 years to do like a new train, and like it will be like a couple of.
Okay. I haven't. I'm not going to lie to you. I haven't followed your points completely, but I'm very grateful for the call. 10:27 is the time. If you can expand upon anything that Gonzalo said, I'd be very grateful. I've got a couple of phone lines open. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. I make this observation occasionally, but on this particular subject, it seems even more pertinent than usual. It's not one that women ring in on much. So I might create in honour of Meghan Markle's 21st century turbocharged feminism. I think we should have a special lane for female. Why don't women have views about trains? The idea that, you know, I know men are generally, train spotters are generally exclusively male, but not completely. But in terms of travelling on trains, everyone should have a view on this. 28 minutes after 10 is the time. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. Next caller up will be in Limassol, but glancing at the clock, Chris, I shall come to you first after the news headlines. A couple of other things before us today. As I've mentioned, we're going to be looking at homelessness and the changing face of the British High Street. They're linked, actually, now I come to think of it. But a couple of other stories that you may have missed. I will explain to you, if I remember and if you remind me, why putting photographs of your child's birthday or their first day at school or similar on Facebook could expose your child to a lifetime of identity theft and fraud. I know that sounds a little bit odd, but now that I've said the words out loud and you've started thinking about it, I bet you've started working out how posting stuff on Facebook involving children, whether it's a special day, a first day at school, a birthday party, a new school uniform, it is estimated today, lead to about £676 million worth of identity fraud that by 2030 would constitute about 2/3 of all online identity theft. So stay tuned for that particular warning. And on a rather less exciting note, I do wonder whether the Conservative Party have had a rush of blood to the head with a suggestion today that they're going to offer Nando's discount cards as a bonus for signing up to join the Conservative Party. I was trying to think what might work, what might prompt me to join a political party. I'd need more than a Nando's discount card, I think. Actually, I got a free Nando's last time I went into the one in Notting Hill Gate because the manager was a big fan of the programme. What would prompt you? Is there any inducement? I would argue, in fact, that if you are running a political party and you think that you need to offer cheap chicken in order to get people to sign up, I would suggest you should probably be looking at the party rather than the chicken. But hey, what do I know? I wasn't imagining it. As a very senior party source tells the Times, the discount card is a very real possibility. These are early discussions, money off at restaurants such as Nando's. Would that be enough to tempt you to join the Tories? Should we do that as a phone-in? I don't think we can. Who's going to ring me and say, yes, James, a significant discount on my delicious peri-peri chicken would definitely see me sacrifice a lifetime of political principles and sign up for any party. It doesn't have to be Labour or Conservative. And speaking of Labour, I suspect that this response references the current Labour leader, but it's a good response. I like it. Let me get it. I've got to get the right one. Here we go. Things I want as a youth. Writes just a lefty moron, known, I think, rather conveniently as JALM on Twitter. Things I want as a youth from a political party which would encourage me to join: build houses, protect renters, make education free, ensure you're paid at least £10 an hour, protect the environment and ensure public ownership of trains and other utilities. I'm not going to lie to you, that does seem to me to be a slightly more winning formula than cheaper chicken. But I suppose it depends how much you like chicken. 10:36 is the time. Back to the trains. Chris is in Limassol in Cyprus. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Great show. Listen to you every day.
Good man.
I'm just ashamed, James. I'm really ashamed.
Why? What have you done?
This country was called... No, this country, I'm ashamed of this country now because it was Great Britain. Now it's just known as England. And everything's just gone. The infrastructure of this country, has been washed away by foreign investors who don't care about the people of this country.
I don't know that they're always foreign.
Making money.
Yeah, I mean, that's true of all investors.
Let's look at the football clubs. Half of them are owned by foreign investors. The railway services are owned by foreign investors. We don't have British Gas, or we don't have London Electricity anymore. Anything that... All our infrastructure, if you have a look at it, is foreign-based.
Do you know, I think you might be... I think you're right. And it's weird, because I was bridling a bit when you start. I don't know why. I was getting ready for a bit of a punch-up, a friendly punch-up. Well, but, you know, you're right when you say that.
If you look at the service that is provided to this country after the Second World War, OK, all other countries modernise themselves on Britain. Yeah. Like India, for instance, has got the best railway service and timetable you can ever imagine.
Has it? I didn't know that.
Based on Britain. Now, to go and get a train, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. And if you're disabled and you need access, you're going to end up missing your train, waiting for a porter to come with a wheelchair to help you on the train.
Do you know? You should have been in the production meeting. Stop talking. I'm trying to pay you enormous compliments. You should have been in the production meeting this morning, because if I'd spoken to you earlier, I'd have phrased the question slightly differently, and I'd have looked at why the railways. I mean, they are awful, aren't they? Most people who commute report terrible, terrible experiences, and we seem to have been seduced into a state of mind that says it has to be like this. You refuse to accept that, Chris. You're very much of the view that it doesn't have to be like this.
And I will not, and I'll never accept it. As long as, I don't care if you're in this country or you're a foreigner, if you buy something from this country and it's for the people and you provide a good service, good on you, well done. But the minute you buy something that was originally part of our infrastructure and you allow that to go downhill and you charge X amount of money and you cry out to say we haven't got the money to build this and build that, that's why the service is terrible, well, give it back.
I hear you. No, I do. I mean, the European Union membership, which isn't going to be relevant for much longer, slightly skews the picture, because economic partnership would mean that the French government can buy bits of our railway, but we could buy bits of the French railway as well if it was set up differently. But generally speaking, especially when we come out of the European Union, the idea of historians in the future looking at economic decline in Britain, which is probably going to accelerate after Brexit, we don't have to have a row about that today, right. But they're going to look at it and they're going to say, but how did the people countenance all of this money being taken out of there? Every time they buy a train ticket, 27 pence ends up in Beijing.
Jamie, it's ridiculous.
It is.
I mean, the MPs in this country, they're toothless and they're shallow. All they care about is putting their face on the TV to say, vote for me, and what's in their...
I'm going to wind you in a little bit, because there are some wonderful politicians, unfashionable though it is to admit, but I would agree with you that they're rarely the ones that end up on the telly. The more often a politician appears on the telly, the less principles, the fewer principles they have. Are you on your hollybobs in Limassol at the moment, or are you working there?
James, I've come to Limassol to have my teeth done, have an operation, because the National Health Service can't do it. The dentists that are running in England that are charging far too much. I've been waiting for an operation now for 18 months. It's been cancelled the countless times. So I'm here now paying privately for an operation in Cyprus and to have all my teeth done.
Well, good luck.
Don't get me started on the National Health Service.
No, I won't. I'll wait for... I wasn't quite expecting that to... I was trying to dilute the politics, Christopher. I thought I'll bring in your presence in Cyprus, and that'll just move us away from the politics. We can swap sangrias and send you on your way. But you've gone in double on the politics, because you're effectively a health tourist as a result, you would argue, of underfunding of the NHS. Chris, what an absolute pleasure. Take care, mate, and enjoy your break. I hope you get time to get some sun on your bones as well while you're recuperating. Let's head over to Brentwood now. Tim's there. Tim, privatisation, nationalisation, somewhere in between. How have we ended... Actually, you tell me why you've rung in. It's not fair to hit you with a question right at the outset.
No, that's all right, mate. Can you hear me?
You're loud and clear.
Oh, good man. I rang up this morning, basically. I listened to your programme avidly.
Good man.
And I was most impressed with your opening statement about, the royal wedding. I thought that was great, because I do find myself growling at you quite a lot on the...
You've got to admit when you're wrong, Tim. You've got to admit when you're wrong, and then everyone will be all right in the long run.
You're a good boy, and hats off to you for doing it. I live in Shenfield,
right,
which is at the end of the new, much lauded Crossrail line. And I can't believe, as a lot of people around here can't believe, that they put Crossrail here at Shenfield when everybody that lives in this locality says, well, why didn't they take it up to Stansted Airport? They've been talking about doing, you know, connecting all the airports, and because of the third runway issue at Heathrow and all the rest of it, for years. And then they spend 16 billion quid or more on putting Crossrail on a line that's got 4 lines from Shenfield into Liverpool Street.
Do you know what?
I can't work that one out.
No, I can't either, but I wonder whether... Go on, go on, make your central point.
Right, I rang up. I believe the railway should be nationalised. I commuted into London for 34 years from here, paying God knows how much in season tickets annually for all that time, right? I believe they should be nationalised. I can't understand why, to incentivise people, the government has never offered any sort of tax concession, and I'm not talking about any particular government, I'm talking about successive governments, haven't offered some sort of a tax concession to people that buy season tickets, and I'm not just saying in London, I mean the length and breadth of the country, those who need to...
You must save a few quid buying a season ticket, don't you, rather than buying a ticket every day?
Say that again?
You must save a few quid when you buy a season ticket.
You save a few quid, but you're not getting the service. I mean, I've sat on the line, believe me, mate, I've sat on the line outside Shenfield Station and Romford and God knows what for hours.
Yes, I do believe you. Can I ask you a cheeky question?
Go on.
When the privatisation, nationalisation debate was raging in the 1980s, which side of it were you on?
Always on nationalisation.
Were you?
I belong to a miniature royal, a small preservation railway in Wales called the Welsh Pool and Land Fair Light Railway.
Oh, lovely.
Which is up the other side of Shrewsbury. It's beautiful.
Right, you are.
Right, and I'm quite invested in it, and as are all the people that are involved.
Oh,
I've got involved in that through a bloke that I worked with in the city, right?
Right.
And I love it. Now, there's a lot of guys up there that are ex-British Rail, right, and they know the ground they're on. And one of the things that's been batted around for years up there is the railway bond system that was the way that the American railroads were built, where you owned railway bonds, and depending on the performance of the railway line and the profit, you'd be paid back a dividend. I'd like to see something like that for season ticket holders here, with the railway lines nationalised, and at the end of the year, those lines that have made a profit, you know, if you're a season ticket holder, you've got a dividend. You get
a bit of a kickback. You get a bit of a dividend. I mean, that seems quite sensible to me.
And the other thing that I'd like to tell you about is...
Go on.
My best mate lives in Plymouth. He's the bloke that he trained me up.
Tell you what, Tim, if you carry on like this, mate, I'm not going to have to buy your autobiography. You're doing yourself out of business on this one.
It's good.
Go on.
I have bought, in the last, I don't know, since he retired, in the last 20-odd years, I've bought at least 10 tickets to go down from Paddington to Plymouth, only to have, you know, when that railway line washed away at Dawlish?
Yes, I do remember that, yeah.
Right? I had to cancel it, you know, several times because of the weather. I had to get a National Express coach and all that palaver. I can't understand how I have to get a train at Paddington to travel 250 miles to Plymouth. The best service I can get is 3 hours and 20 minutes. If I get a train from Euston to Preston in Lancashire, where I've got another really good friend, it takes 2 hours and 10 minutes,
nuts,
and that's almost the same distance. So why are we spending 52 billion quid on HS2 to take 10 minutes off the journey time to Birmingham?
Well, the short answer to that, and I'm not getting into a ding-dong about HS2 today, is that if I was defending it, I would say it's not about speed, it's about capacity. It's about increasing the capacity on the most...
Okay, so stick another 4 carriages on the train, or do what they do in Europe and use double-deckers like they do in Holland and Germany.
They don't fit under the tunnels, Tim.
Well, then raise the bridges.
Well, then how much is that going to mean? You can't start... You can't raise the bridges. It's a tunnel through a hill.
All right, make the lines in the gullies then.
I thought, well, that could end up costing more than 32 billion quid. And you'd have to extend all the platforms at the stations.
Has it been explored?
I don't know. I'm not arguing with you about railways, mate, ever.
You know what I mean?
Remind me.
You are arguing about
I'm not arguing with you.
Whether it should be privatised or...
Well, that's not an argument. That's a frank exchange of views. Tim, thank you for the kind words, and thank you for listening. A cracking call. 10:46 is the time. This is nice, isn't it? Having a conversation, lots of different views. No right, no wrong. Problem is, of course, that if we were in government, we'd have to come up with a conclusion. And as Wayne, who I think is back in Basildon after his sojourn in Tenerife last week, has just said we should put Tim in a cabinet meeting. That voice alone will convince them to renationalise the trains, and he goes for hashtag Essex Massive, where we contemplate a curious case of nationalising railways. Why has it become such a dirty word in this country over the last 30 or 40 years, particularly when you reflect on... I don't know enough about other countries. I've got 3 new rules. I don't know if you're interested in these or not. Number 1, these are my 3 observations as I sort of enter my 5th decade. Well, I'm halfway through it, actually. There aren't any grown-ups. I wrote this down for you at the weekend. That's how much I care about you. There aren't any grown-ups. This notion that someone's going to come along and fix everything. So, I mean, it's the essence of Brexit, actually, isn't it? There aren't any grown-ups. We are the grown-ups. How terrifying is that? Observation number 2, and this was what I arrived at while reading Orwell. There's nothing new under the sun. Talking about the nationalisations of railways, I think that he wrote the English Revolution in the very early 40s, and his answer to fixing the country was nationalisation of land, mine, railways, banks and major industries. And number 3 is we know nothing. We know so little, and the people who claim they know the most are generally the ones who know the least. So, for example, how are the railways run in Ireland? Do you know? I don't. What about Japan? Is that private, public, nationalised, privatised? Don't know. Why don't you know? You should know. How can you have a view on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing without having loads of points of reference and comparison to inform your position? I don't know. Just sort of pick a side, start cheering, down with privatisation. Up with nationalisation. That is me I'm doing an impression of, by the way, not anyone else, lest you think I was being patronising. So that's it. There you go. Grown-ups, there aren't any. Nothing new under the sun. Every idea you've ever had, someone else has had before. And we know we know nothing. Against that backdrop, George, what would you like to say about railways?
Yeah, good morning. I'd like to just say that, unfortunately, as much as I feel very sorry for commuters who use the trains, they need to look deeper into this. Network Rail is a publicly owned company, all but in name. It's hemorrhaging money. It's run as a hobby rather than as a business. Numerous vanity projects that have failed miserably.
Like what? I've got a feeling that you work for Network Rail, so I'm not going to start having an argument with you because you'll just turn around and say, well, I work there, James, so get back in your box.
Well, that's true.
There you go. So give me an example of the vanity projects, and just to put it in context for people who don't know as much about the issues as you do.
Well, they built these rail operating centres over the UK at various locations that were going to revolutionise signalling and make trains more prompt and on time. They're already far too small. They're not fit for purpose in terms of the equipment installed for running the system on a 150-year-old infrastructure. They're costing vast sums of money weekly. They don't actually produce anything apart from statistics.
But isn't this... Aren't you telling me that the people currently running Network Rail are rubbish? Not that all nationalisations would be rubbish, or am I misunderstanding you?
The management of Network Rail...
Your bosses.
Yeah, effectively.
But we've got to be honest about this, because very rarely do people ring me up to tell me that their bosses are brilliant. So your bosses are muppets. That's what you're telling me.
Yeah. They couldn't run a bath, basically. And that's half the problem with the railways. It's not the private train operators. If you were to look into the figures, which I won't go spouting off now, but the vast majority of delays are either caused by the infrastructure or outside influences that cannot be controlled by anybody.
Yes.
The actual train operating companies and the reliability of the modern train is quite impressive. But it's like trying to run an electric car on a concrete road. That's basically what I'm trying to say. What
if I put you in charge, and bearing in mind there'll be a lot of competition for the position, I've only appointed 2 people so far. Jamie Oliver's in charge of food and Martin Lewis is in charge of money. If I put you in charge of railways, what would you do?
Well, first of all, I would try to get down the debt mountain, because that's just a millstone around the neck of the railway.
What? Whose debts? Network Rail's debts?
Yes, it's hemorrhaging money, left, right and centre.
Do we know what the numbers are, roughly?
It's billions.
But how can it be hemorrhaging money if it's government-owned?
Well, precisely, because taxpayers' money, and I don't see why somebody who lives in Orkney or Shetland should be paying for the railway in Kent.
Oh, you don't think that?
No, because
right.
I just believe that's George Orwell.
But no, the phone line's going bad now, George. I think you failed your job interview for this. You can't tax according to where you live on railways.
No,
it's national infrastructure.
Yeah.
It's not Ockley infrastructure. It's national infrastructure that we're talking about.
Right. And subsequently, since the transfer of the business from Railtrack, a private company, to Network Rail, subsequently publicly owned, it's demonstrably got worse because there's no control over spending, planning, implementation of any plan.
But again, I'm left with the thought that you're right, because, or at least you're going to get unchallenged on this because you work in the sector and I don't. But it doesn't prove to me that it has to be this way. Just because it is this way currently, you could argue that with the fracturing and the splintering of the rail services and the curious sort of nature of Network Rail Track. I think you could argue that things could be done better without necessarily turning it into a case for more privatisation and widespread privatisation. It's very politically popular, the notion of nationalisation, and that's quite odd because it's a pendulum swing. I bet you 20 years ago it wouldn't have been, and yet possibly because there's no propaganda attached to it. It's one of the interesting things about Jeremy Corbyn, who I try daily to come to a warmer appreciation of, just because I'm tired of being hated by everybody, right-wingers and left-wingers at the moment. It's very lonely being a centrist dad. The only relief is that there's so many centrist dads and mums. But I'm trying to sort of warm to Jeremy. Quite a lot of the stuff he calls for is oddly uncontroversial, at least in the terms of the current political climate. So nationalisation hasn't had a job done on it by the right-wing media, has it, in recent years? It's sort of crept up, and that's possibly why it appeals to people right across the political spectrum. If you want conclusive proof of what I just described about the influence of right-wing media on public perceptions, Michael Gove has given a speech this morning in which he talks about Britain's warm attitude to immigration, saying it's one of the warmest places in the world for people to come to. And what he's referring to with that ludicrous canard, what he's actually referring to is polling, in that the concern about immigration has gone off a comparative cliff since the referendum result for one very, very simple reason. The right-wing media has stopped trying to terrify people about it. And so without someone whispering in your ear every day, immigrants nicking your biscuits, without someone doing that every day, turns out people aren't frightened of losing their biscuits. So much so that Michael Gove can stand up in public this morning and pretend that Brexit was, for a huge portion of the population, about something other than fear of immigration. Strange times. 10:57. Craig is in Singapore. Oh, I don't know. What train did you catch to get there, Craig?
An early one.
Well done.
Nice to speak to you.
Likewise.
First-time caller.
Very welcome.
Listen to the programme daily and all of the podcasts. So
well, thank you.
The call.
Oh, thank you.
Just on the nationalisation, where I would sit is that yes, it needs to be nationalised. I mean, if you look at the arguments that Virgin and Stagecoach put up around the giving back of the East Coast contracts, wasn't to do with leads on the line. It was actually to do with lines on the line or rails on the line. What they were saying was that it wasn't possible to make money because they need a more intensive or more comprehensive schedule, and the lines and the infrastructure wouldn't permit that.
That was one explanation. The failure, well, not failure, but the expectation that rail passenger numbers would be much higher was, I think, part of it as well, quite a big part. But you could probably knit the two together and say passenger numbers would be higher if the capacity had been increased. I don't know enough to draw that conclusion.
Yeah. Yes, but what surprises me from distance is that Grayling, the transport, is it Tom Grayling,
Chris Grayling, mate, yeah. He said it's almost as if every time he makes a mess of one department, he gets rewarded with another one. The nonsense he inflicted on prisons is going to be doing damage there for generations. But anyway, Chris Failing.
Well, he said that the joint venture, or the Stagecoach Virgin, had lost about 200 million and suffered reputational loss which is why he sort of allowed them to give it back. But forgive me, I mean, what about the obligations that they would have had under a contract to pay the government $3 billion a year?
3.3, I over more than 1 year, but I don't get this, mate. I'll be honest with you, because if you and I went into business and you said, I'll give you X amount of money to have that hot dog stall, right, at my festival this summer, and then you turned up and said, oh, actually, I can't give you that much money anyway, but I still want to open up my hot dog stall, or actually just take the hot dog stall back. The idea that you don't get penalised. And you know what the kicker is, Craig? Neither of these companies are being prevented from bidding for future franchises. I can't get my head around stuff like that.
No, I can't. And finally, just to wrap up, because I know you've got a lot of callers, I just want to say thank you, because the Singapore National Bus Company actually owns Metro Line buses in the UK.
Oh, that was cruel. Where we are, I think, struggling to find much enthusiasm for the Conservative Party's idea to start giving out Nando's discount cards as an inducement to membership. I'm not going to get a phone-in out of this. Too many self-appointed comedians, me chief among them. But I do wonder what might tempt you to join a political party by way of inducement, because I don't really want to join a political party. And I said, oh, hang on a minute, how about a lifetime supply of candy floss? And you went, count me in. What party is it? Doesn't matter, mate. I love candy floss. We'll leave that burning in the background.